So you got around $50 to spend on a brand new controller. You've been looking at controllers. You see the Spectra Infinity controller for around 40 bucks, sometimes around 30 if you find them on sale. And then the 8BITDO controller, the Pro 2 controller for the Xbox, which is around $50. You've heard great things about both the controllers. You don't know which one to buy. Well, in today's video, I'm going to help you narrow that down by comparing both these controllers to each other, a side-by-side comparison, and a game comparison between Dirt 5, Rocket League, and Tekken. Make sure you go to the description below where I'll have links to both controllers, full reviews on both controllers because these aren't reviews, and also I'm going to have chapters posted below in the timeline to help you make a decision faster and not have to watch all the fluff. Shut up, dog. Let's get into it. Here we go, guys. Here are both the controllers. As you can see, they're both wired controller. With the Spectrum Infinity controller, you can actually take the cable off to where you can store it later on if you'd like. This is a USB micro USB cable. It's not USB-C, unfortunately. And with the 8BITDO controller, you can't even unplug it, so it you gotta wrap it up and put it up in somewhere if you want it to look nice. There's really no way for it to happen, so Spectrum wins this one. The Spectrum also has the volume control on it where you can turn your mic up, down, and mute it. With the 8BITDO, you only have a mute switch on the bottom of the controller right here, as you can see. Also, as you can tell, there are two totally built looking different controllers. This is a PlayStation controller. I don't care what you guys say. Tell me in the comments I'm wrong. And here's your usual Xbox controller. It feels great. I love it personally. I am definitely going to pick this controller when it comes to feel. They both have an Xbox share button because they're next gen console controllers, of course. And of course, these do have two extra buttons on each of the controller where they can be programmed to any of the buttons on the front or triggers or anything like that. The Spectrum Infinity has trigger locks where you can, have a less trigger pull. With the 8BITDO controller, you don't have that on there. But what you do have is the software, which we're going to show you real quick, and then we'll get back into it. Future self here, real quick. I just want to let you know, we're not going to do an overview of the app for the 8BITDO controller. If you want to see that, go to the description, the full review, just to save some more time because this video is a longer style video. Let's get back into it. Alright guys, so we are here in Rocket League. We're going to test a few things with the game just to get started. We're going to start with the trigger here. We got the trigger stop all the way turned on. We're going to turn it back on, just showing y'all. And what happens when we hit the trigger? Just like any other game that's considered racing, you go super slow. So what you're going to need to do is, unfortunately, turn this off, be able to go faster. Now, underneath, the two buttons underneath, of course, I set up for jump and power slide. Now you can set these up for boost if you want or anything else. This is just something I set up for the test personally. Alright, so off the rip, the controller does feel good in my hand, just like it should, because, well, this is how I've always played with Xbox controller, of course. Buttons I have set up. The only thing I do differently is I probably instead of power slide, I probably set this up as boost, drive, but the joysticks feel really good. Everything does, there's no drift from as far as I can tell. So the controller feels good itself. Let's move on to the 8BITDO controller and see how it stacks up in this game as well. So here's the 8BITDO controller. We're going to test the trigger. There's no trigger stops on this, as I mentioned earlier, so literally you just press it, you're good to go. Alright guys, so with this controller, you do have to hit this button to turn on the buttons on the back. It's kind of weird. I wish it can just kind of have it on, but I did go ahead and set the underneath button as the boost because I thought I would have a better time with it. I utilize that more than I would the slide per se. So we're going to test that out here in a second in a real game. Alright, so evidently if you leave a game in Rocket League, you get banned for like so many minutes, and I didn't know that. So here we are. We're going to play. Let's try it. Alright, so right off the rip, I'm going to say I'm having a little bit of issues. Now this is just me. It's not the controller. Let me be clear when I say this. On this, hitting the X versus the A. Sometimes I accidentally hit the A instead of the X to slide, the power slide, but that's because I played with a Xbox controller for so long that it's just my fingers and everything have a bigger grip. Hold on, I'm grabbing the controller so you can see it, and it's just easier to distinguish well, I can't speak, distinguish between the X and the A, versus on this controller, it's just my hands are a little bit closer. Everything just it doesn't feel as natural to me. My teammates probably hate me right now, but that's not to say it's a bad thing. I just have to get used to it. Like, I'm already starting to feel like my thumbs are slowly adjusting to it, and I just need to yeah, adjust to it. So, and then if this isn't an issue for you, then you can play this game no problem, right? I mean, other than that, the controller feels pretty good. I don't really notice a whole lot of an issue. I don't have no juice left in my rockets here. So other than that, the joysticks being at the bottom, you know, that's okay. You get used to that as well. The controller don't feel bad. The triggers definitely feel better, in my personal opinion, on this controller versus the Spectrum Infinity. And with that, you know, it's probably preference. But like I said, again, you can't use the joysticks or the trigger stops on the Spectrum Infinity, so it kind of, you know, why have it, right? So there you have it for this controller with this game. Let's hop into another game and see what we feel, if we feel the same way, or maybe the Spectrum Infinity will win out. Let's try a fighting game. Oh, if I would have made that right there, that would have been a great ending. But no, I'm trash. I suck at video games. Alright guys, so here we are with another game. The controller this time up first is going to be the 8BITDO controller. Why is he coming in here like a wrecking ball? Hold on. I was not ready for that. Yeah, we gotta start over. Alright guys, so we're going to redo this. I actually messed up and didn't have the audio done for this part, so we're going to do it again, and this time we're going to see how the 8BITDO controller matches up against the Spectrum Infinity controller for fighting games. I can tell you right off the rip, I do enjoy the buttons, clickiness, and just how they feel compared to the Spectrum Infinity controller. Myself, and the D-pad does feel just a little bit better. Now again, that does not say this controller is by any means more comfortable than the Spectrum Infinity controller. To tell you the truth, I believe it's not as comfortable. I've pretty much said that throughout the entire video, and I'm going to stick with that just because of how it fits in my hands versus how the Spectrum Infinity fits in my hands. It's just not as comfortable. Everything else about the controllers, the buttons, how everything's laid out, the joysticks, you know, I'm not a big fan of them either personally, but everything else feels pretty good when it comes to the game. Now that doesn't mean I'll necessarily choose this controller over the Spectrum Infinity for the fighting game, but it does mean there is nothing wrong with this controller. If you're going for a controller like this for a racing, or a fighting game, then by all means, I don't see an issue with this controller at all. Matter of fact, I like the controller, and now that I've played with it for a few times, re-recording this video, it seems like 3 different times now. Other than that, I think the controller is a very good controller, and with that being said, let's move on to the Spectrum Infinity controller and see how it pairs up to fighting games. Alright, here's the Spectrum Infinity controller we're about to play with and see what we get for here. Let's turn on the colors just because we want to be cool. Let's start with the feel of the controller, the comfy part, you know, if it's comfortable or not. Yes, I'm just gonna go ahead and say this is more of a comfortable controller for me versus the 8BITDO controller for games like this, because I just feel like I have a better grip on the controller. My hands ain't so on top of each other because the controller is just a little bit smaller, and you know, everything feels good. Now, when I want to talk about the button clickiness and just the buttons overall, I will say the 8BITDO controller has a slight edge when it comes to that. Personally, I feel like the buttons, just pressing the buttons on the 8BITDO controller X, Y, B, and A versus this controller, there is definitely a noticeable difference. And the D-pad itself, I like the D-pad on here personally. I can see where somebody might prefer the 8BITDO D-pad over this for fighting games and retro games and stuff like that, but I honestly think it's personal preference. When it comes to just the, if you want to use the joystick, I feel like this is set up better where you can use the joystick if you'd rather use the joysticks, you know, your left joystick to move around and stuff, versus the on the 8BITDO controller, just because you got a little bit more of a distance and you're not sitting here on top of each other if you wanted to use both of them. So let's just test that out real quick if he stops comboing me. Yeah, see, I don't know the reason for the right joystick or thumbstick, personally. I think you, oh no. No, 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 no. Here, let's finish this full off. But yeah, I think this works out good. I actually had the the thumbsticks and stuff over halfway and was playing with it. You can actually turn these on all the way, I believe. Let's run a test on that real quick and just see. Yeah, you see, the joysticks on, or the triggers on this controller, you can have them turned on and use them, so that is going to give you a little bit more of a competitive edge on fighting games, personally, just because you don't have to hit the trigger. The trigger doesn't have to travel so far to get back to where you can keep pressing it. It's literally it's a pretty big difference in my personal opinion. You know what I mean? Like that versus that. So that just, that's just me personally. Uh-oh, what's happened? But yeah, that's the controller for the Spectra Infinity and the 8BITDO controller. All right, guys, so here's the trigger stop on. We are hitting it, and as you can see, we are not really moving. So what we're going to do is turn it off, and as you can see, we're moving. So this game, definitely not good for trigger stops again. So we already know the 8BITDO controller is going to win when it comes to that. The rest of the controller feels pretty good when it comes to, I don't even know the buttons on this game. The rest of the controller feels pretty good, again, in my hand personally, and with the, the driving mechanism with the joysticks, the way they're laid out, it feels pretty good. Again, guys, you can't use a trigger stop, so there's really no point of, and this is overall, if you're buying this controller for racing games, then, if you're looking for a controller for racing games, this is not the controller, because you can't utilize the trigger stops, so there's really no point of playing with this controller. I am very, very bad at this game, evidently. But other than that, everything else does feel pretty good on the controller. But we're going to move on to the next controller, the 8BITDO controller, just because, well, I mean, there's really no point of talking about this no more if you're not going to buy it for these style games. Now, if you do still want to buy it and you got a mix and you're okay pressing the trigger all the way in and you play with first-person shooter games and stuff, then that changes things a lot. But we'll mention that at the very end. And here is the 8BITDO controller. As you could guess, we don't really matter about the trigger stops because there's no trigger stops on here. So technically, we were just playing this game to see how it feels. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the rip, I do enjoy how this controller feels with an actual racing game itself. The trigger, or the thumbsticks feel very good. They're not... how do I say it? They don't feel as cheap as the Spectra Infinity, but again, you are paying a little bit more for this controller itself. But I do like that. I do like the way these thumbsticks feel versus the Spectra Infinity. As you can tell, I'm already driving better on this game versus the Spectra Infinity controller, so that's a plus in itself. The overall feel of the controller actually doesn't feel bad with me on this game. Maybe I'm just starting to finally get used to the controller, but I do enjoy it playing a racing game with this. I have B set up. I don't have B set up, so I can't really. I don't have the underneath button set up. You could set B up as underneath. That way you could have a little bit easier time drifting and stuff around corners. Oh, I do have B set up. I'm lying. All right, let's try the B button underneath and see how we take corners without hitting the buttons itself. So overall, this controller gets a good score, in my opinion, when it comes to racing games itself. Now, as you can tell, you can kind of see how my trigger finger is, how it's sitting on it, how it just kind of sticks out a little bit. There's a little bit of a gap right here. If I had to put anything on it, it would be that. But really, I could just wrap my finger around it more, but I'm not used to doing that. So there you go. We could just press it up against the controller board. But that's it, guys. Let's talk about my overall experience with both controllers and what controller I recommend buying at the end of the day. So final thoughts on both of these controllers? Well, it's gonna be simple. Both controllers are not bad controllers at the end of the day. It really depends on what you're trying to get the controller for. You see my pros and you see my negatives on each controller. When it comes to racing games, me personally, I'm gonna go with the 8BITDO controller just because I don't need those trigger stops on the bottom of my controller because they do nothing, and I just feel like I have a better quality build when it comes to trigger pull, joysticks, and all that when it comes to it. Fighting games, on the other hand, I can take it or leave it either way because of comfort. I'll probably go with the Spectra Infinity, but that doesn't mean the controller is not a good controller. The 8BITDO controller is literally just comfort at that point for me. You guys know how I feel about my Xbox controllers, so I'm gonna pick that for comfort every single time. But let me know in the comments what controller you're gonna pick. And if you haven't, make sure you click on one of these videos over here. YouTube's gonna suggest from my playlist for you to play.